So then to kind of get into more of the work you're doing currently, could you tell us a little bit more about what you do with Avalanche Insights, Campbell, and also Comscore, Chris? Maybe explain a little bit more specifically what your titles mean, and you could also get into a little bit of like, what a typical workday looks like for you.
Yeah, sure. So I can start. Uh, like I said, Comscore is a marketing analytics, market research, media measurement firm. So they do a lot of things, data for clients. My formal title is Client Insights Analyst, and I work in the vertical of pharmaceutical companies. What we do is there's two different ways that we assist clients. One of them is with syndicated products. One of them is more custom analytics. And I work more on the custom analytics side, which means it's kind of like consulting. Your client has like specific data requests. So for example, we work a lot with like website visitation data. So client will say like how many people are visiting our website versus our competitor's website, and we can go in and look at spikes in the website visitation and say, okay, mid-November, there's like a big spike on this person's website. Why did that happen? And if you wanted to look at this in terms of like the automotive industry, there's a spike in electric vehicle Google searches in mid-November. My job is to compile a report about searches in November across the automotive landscape. And I will discover that, oh, the electric vehicle maker Rivian filed for an IPO in mid-November. So that's what I do in terms of like custom research for clients. And there's like some other stuff we do. Maybe I'll get into that later. That was a little bit of rambling, so I apologize, and I'll give that to you, Campbell.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I am an analyst at Avalanche Insights, which means the structure of the role is pretty similar to what Chris described as well, and has some similarities to my first role, which I can talk about as well. But as an analyst, I am on the client engagement half of our company, which is currently still operating with a kind of like a consulting model. The other half of our company is working on building tech that might eventually be follow more of like a tech sales, like SaaS model, but right now there's like a boutique consulting side, and that's what I work on. And so a client or organization will come to us and have research questions that they want answered. We do work, like I was saying, with a lot of political advocacy clients. We specifically were founded with kind of like a progressive ideology. We specifically work with Democrats. That's who we are. And so an example of a project might be like a climate advocacy organization wants to understand what is the best way to message about this issue to swing voters or something, for example. And so I would kind of take that client ask and I would translate that into like, what is the best survey design that's going to understand some of these like attitudinal and perceptional beliefs that people have, and then kind of manage the end-to-end logistical process of fielding the survey. So all the things that it takes to get it like programmed, fielded, work with vendors, all of that. And then when the data comes back, I'll analyze it. So I'll translate it into meaningful insights, and then also put it in like a deck with strategic recommendations that I present to clients. And so I'm involved with that kind of higher level of strategic thinking and those relationships with clients. And yeah, I think that's a good place to stop, but there's plenty more I'll be able to keep elaborating on as well.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, that was a really great explanation of what you do. As you saw earlier, our panel's audience is mostly underclassmen, it seems. And so not everyone might be familiar with specifically what market research necessarily entails. Of the work that you were just talking about, could you share about maybe some projects that you specifically enjoyed, or could even point to as like the favorite project?
Yeah, I can we can mix up the order, go back and forth. I'll take this chance to explain examples from both my first job and my current job, because I think both are a bit different and both could have different, could catch the interest of different people in this call. So my first job, where my title was associate strategist and strategist, essentially a similar thing. But I worked for a small firm, about 30 people, and we specialized in qualitative research. And so that is not necessarily surveys, but it's more things like online digital diaries, focus groups, going into people's homes and having like an interactive tour or interview with them. Basically any kind of creative format of just like talking in depth with consumers is something that we would do. And we kind of had like a perspective of, or I guess kind of a reputation of being a creative agency. And so more corporate clients would want to come to us and be like, we have this problem, let's get at it in a really kind of fun, immersive, creative way. So an example of projects that I really liked at my first job, one, we did a global project for Nike about understanding this consumer that they had titled the everyday athlete. And it was people kind of in their early 20s who lived in urban areas and had all of these different, you know, things about modern life that were getting in the way, and it was about figuring out what were the product innovations that could serve that consumer. And so we did these online digital diaries with people in not just in the US, but also like India and Europe and Mexico and all over the world. And it was kind of diving into this immersive data, these videos they uploaded about, you know, a day in the life of working out. And so I think that, and then we ultimately were able to translate that into product innovation concepts, and then go through a few rounds of like testing those concepts with consumers. That was really fun. And I also, can talk about some more examples in one-on-one calls as well. An example of a project from my current job, like I said, we work more in a survey format for our research at my current job. But part of what makes the way we do surveys different is that we're able to, what our tech helps us do is collect open-ended responses and then quantify them and translate them into like quantitative outputs. So we can code the responses quickly and kind of get that qualitative depth at quantitative scale. And so one project we did at my new job was for not exactly in the political space, but more in the nonprofit space, was for TED, like TED Talks. And they wanted to understand their what the concept of impact means for TED audiences around the world, and how they should be thinking about and understanding how they're impacting people with their talks and their other programs and products. And so that was also across all different continents, listening to people's stories of how they, you know, saw a TED Talk and it changed their life in this way, or that way. And we were able to kind of take that, translate that into a framework they could use to think about impact, and a way that they could use that to kind of like impact their fundraising and revenue goals with that internal framework. So those are two examples.
Those are some great examples, Campbell. Interesting stuff. So what I would say about market research is that it means a lot of different things, and it crosses a bunch of different industries. Like, I wouldn't say that market research is its own industry. I would say that it's actually like a school of thought, because you can see job positions in banking and data analytics, politics, I don't know, product development. It doesn't matter the industry, but it'll say like something along the lines of like market research analyst. So it's everywhere. It's a school of thought. It's like a way of having, like, being able to be a critical thinker and know like where to dive into a problem. That's my thought on that. But in terms of like when it applies to my job, so my first role, I worked for a PR firm, and I did analytics of like social media for different brands. So a client would come to us and they would say, what were people talking about on Twitter in November about our brand? So we would see different spikes of like a lot of tweets that were mentioning the brand on like this week specifically, and then dive in a little bit more into what were these tweets, what was the general trend of conversation, what were the themes during that time. So that was like market research for the brand just on social media specifically. And then so more recently in my current job, we have a lot of access to website visitation data for our clients. So for example, like one of the brands would be like a prescription drug. I don't know, like say an asthma inhaler website or something like that. We can see the trends of how many people are visiting that site and how many times they visited the site, like when an advertisement was aired on TV, like was there a spike in that? And then we can look at the same thing across like competitors' websites and say like, okay, why did they get more visitation at this time versus like we didn't have that spike? And we kind of like extrapolate and take a step back and look into just like the news or what other competitors are doing and see, okay, they said this, they like announced this about their brand on this day, and they had more of an impact and more website traffic. So if you guys do something like this, if you the client does something like this, like how they did, it would be very successful for your brand strategy. So yeah, those are two ways that I would talk about market research in my roles.
Of course, great examples from the both of you. Students, if you'd like to hear more about like maybe specific projects, we do have some office hour slots open, and I think Jen sent the link through the chat, so you can access that there. To continue on with the panel, I think like there's a lot of compelling reasons for why students would want to enter the market research industry or school of thought, as you said, Chris. How did you know that you wanted to apply for this job, and or how did you know that it was the right job for you? And Chris, I think you mentioned you had applied to like 300 other jobs before landing on this one. Were you applying to other kinds of industries during that process, or what was that kind of like?
Yeah. So I applied to a lot of jobs before I finally landed one. And there's like a lot that I can speak to on that, like the job search process. But I guess specifically, if I wanted to talk about why I landed at where I did, it was kind of like I finally got a job offer and I took it. um, but so after my third year, I interned at Comscore actually in a very similar position where I'm at right now. And after I graduated, they weren't really looking for people to come on, so I started work somewhere else. But then my old boss reached out to me from Comscore a few months into my like when I was in my other job and said that they're looking for people in like a pretty similar position to what I interned in. And yeah, I hopped back to Comscore. So there's that.
Yeah, so I think this would be a good this is a good springboard for me to just give you the overview of how my job searches for both my roles, like with the path they sort of took in general. So both of them really involved both of my recruiting processes for both times I was looking for jobs were very networking and relationship based, rather than going to places where there were just a bunch of job postings and kind of cold applying. Obviously, both of those strategies have a ton of potential for everyone, but my career story is very much based on like research and networking. So when I was at UVA, I took a course, and I don't know if it still exists, but it was a like a liberal arts kind of seminar that had basically us do a lot of introspection, and it was called like Design Thinking Your Career, and had us do a lot of introspection, a lot of discovering what our interests were, and using that to put together a really specific idea of what we wanted out of our career and what kind of things we would like out of a job and career, and also connected us to oh, that's great. Also connected us to other resources through UVA Career Services. So one other thing I did through that course was I signed up for an alumni mentoring program. And so I was able to, I was currently in this class where I was saying, like, I love understanding people. I love coming up with creative ideas based on what I'm learning. I love that kind of like curiosity and social sciences aspect. And then I was luckily paired with this alumni mentor who said, you know, you sound like you'd be a perfect fit for this field of qualitative consumer insights, which is basically just being paid to be super curious about people for a living and translate that insight into like strategies that are impactful for businesses. And so I said, perfect, that's a perfect fit. I am going to go down the path of looking at this really niche thing that's done in a lot of small agencies that don't even really post roles on like job boards. But through my mentor, I said, like, who can you tell me about just that's out there that exists that I can do research on and just like learn about them? Who can you connect me to just kind of informationally? So my mentor was able to tell me this list of maybe 10 different small agencies that specialized in qualitative consumer insights. I did a lot of research on them, and she ended up connecting me to talk to a few of them. And one of them that I talked with was Now What, which I ended up doing an internship between my third and fourth year, and then was hired full time after my fourth year, and then worked there for the first 2 or 3 years of my career. So that was how I found my way into that role. And like I said, it kind of lined up with all that interest in social science that I had with understanding people. And then when I was looking to change careers, I similarly just started out by thinking as wide as I could about my network, starting out with talking to friends I knew, just like friends my own age that were involved in career fields that were kind of close to. I reached out to Jen Jones again, asked her who she knew that might be relevant in careers I was looking at, talked to anyone I could think of about like what is out there in this career field that is kind of like what I already do, but more politics focused. And through that was just able to kind of find examples of firms, lists online of like this really niche thing I was interested in, and then reach out to them directly and kind of make the case for why I was exactly passionate about exactly what they did.
And to go off of that, I'd like to share some networking experiences that I have and ultimately helped me with probably getting a job. So at a high level, what I would do with getting these connections to get informational interviews would be, I see a company that I'm interested in, I go to LinkedIn, I filter based on the university they attended. So I would find UVA. And once I find that person's name, I would go to a website that UVA alumni has called, I think it's called Wahoo Connect. Is that right? Yeah, so you get a Wahoo Connect and you put in their first and last name, and then you can get their actual email address. That way you can send them an email address instead of kind of like a LinkedIn message might be kind of blind and they'll ignore it. But the way that I used to approach these emails would be in several parts. I would say like, hello, fellow Wahoo, or something like that. And I would say, I see you work at blank, or I see you work in blank industry. And then you ask them to connect on like a 30-minute phone call. But it's important to give them something like actionable for coming up. So you say like, are you free for a 30-minute phone call next Monday or next Tuesday afternoon or something like that, instead of just saying, are you free to talk sometime? Because then that email might get buried and they just like forgot to respond to you or something like that. But something that's also very critical in that email is to give like a sentence as to why you're interested and what exactly you want to get out of the call. So if you do like a little bit of a research before you ask this question, I just wrote down like an example of a question to ask, but I see you work at the marketing research firm Nielsen as a market analyst in the consumer packaged goods vertical. I would love to hear a little bit about how you work with the research data and how that data influences your client's business decisions. So if you have something that's more articulated in that email, then they'll be like, oh, this guy, like, this person might actually, this, they're really interested, is basically what I'm trying to say. You want to demonstrate as much interest as you can in like a brief short email. Oh yeah, and then the last thing I was going to say about that is when you're sending the email or when you're going into this informational interview, it's I don't it's not the best to go into it with the mentality of how do I get a referral? How do I get a job referral out of this? It's more important to go into it with the mentality of what do I really want to learn about this industry, this job type, this person. Because if you go in with that mentality, then it's not, they don't get the impression that you're just trying to use them. They're getting the impression that they can actually share their experiences.
Yeah, and I'll
Great
just
point there. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna just reiterate what Chris just said, in that I've also used that method a ton, reaching out to either finding UVA alumni on LinkedIn, finding their contact information through Who's Connect or whatever that is called, and also just anyone who could be like also a possible unexpected sort of like warm connection, like a friend of a friend or someone through a professor, and really just putting the time into using those conversations, thinking of them as a way to be curious and thinking of them as a way to like learn everything you can about all the jobs that are out there and what might fit your interests. Because if you can learn a lot about that, and really narrow in on exactly what you would be interested in and why you would be interested in it, that just makes so much of a more compelling case when you go to apply to the job, because you're coming across as genuinely having an interest and a reason for why you're applying to something, and like the employer can really see that connection that you have to it.
Yeah, exactly. Like just showing the interest and demonstrating the curiosity, it helps. Like, so in my experience with my first job, I didn't get the job from any networking or any of that. I just got it from luck. I got lucky with just a straight up LinkedIn application, and then I got into the interview process. But with all of the networking and informational interviews that I had conducted and gone through, I got so much of a better idea of like where I wanted to fit in on a team, what industry I wanted to get into, what my strengths and weaknesses were, in such a way that like all those conversations just helped me become a really good interviewee. Just being curious and not going into those informational interviews just trying to get a referral.
Those were really great answers. I think it is very important to emphasize how networking doesn't have to be some sort of transactional like conversation. And I think you guys really covered that great. I was going to ask if you had any tips for students who had difficulty reaching out to people, because I think that is something that students definitely struggle with, but I feel like you guys covered that as well too. So, okay, you've gotten through the networking process and you've kind of landed an interview. Could you talk about the interview process you went through at your current role, and maybe types of questions that they asked you and how students should kind of prepare for going through the interview process in the market research industry?
Okay, sure. So in my experience, the most important part of the interview was always the tell me about yourself question, because that's the point in time when you have the most time in the interview to say anything. So get any like burning questions, burning statements out of the way when you're talking about your experiences, job experiences, classes you've taken, because sometimes you might not have the opportunity later on to talk about certain things if it just doesn't come up. And second most important thing is the question section. When the interviewer says, do you have any questions for me? Come prepared with like very pinpointed questions at like the role and at the company. I'll just use like the Nielsen example again, but just say something like, I know that this role is in the consumer packaged goods vertical. What are some specific data points that you work with pretty often and that end up being really important for like KPIs or just something like that? I don't know.
Yeah, so at kind of a basic level, the interview process, I think, was pretty similar at both of the jobs I've had at these kind of smaller 30-person size companies. And the way, yes, exactly, totally agree with what was just put in the chat. The way that they've worked in both my cases was there was some kind of like reach out or introduction, maybe sending an email that had, maybe someone introducing me, sending an email that had my resume, or maybe my resume and a cover letter. Then probably a 30-minute phone screening just to understand that I have a general like knowledge about the company and general fit for the role, and that my background makes sense to someone who would be considering this role. Then after that, something that's really common in the types of places I've worked is a sample assignment. So they want to have a sense of the aptitude that you have to actually do the real hands-on work that the job entails. So in both cases, they've given me a prompt that's really similar to the type of work they do. And then I take a few days, maybe I spend 2 or 3 days working on it, and give a presentation to the team of kind of like an example deck, like PowerPoint, like I would make for the job, and give them a chance to answer questions. And that, and then that is kind of also a part of like a maybe hour-long-ish sort of behavioral interview where they ask traditional interview questions as well. And so in both my cases, it was a really big part of my application for the job was just showing the way that I was able to be, you know, curious, insightful, and like clearly present my ideas through that actual sample work product that I did. But then also those interviews also very much included the tell me something about yourself type of question that you have to have an answer that you just have practiced 50 times in the mirror and are super confident in. And then other questions as well about kind of my skills and interests and my curiosity to ask other questions as well. And I would just extra emphasize the importance of using any interview practice with other people that you can. I know UVA Career Services has a lot of good resources for doing mock interviews. To be honest, when I was looking for a job in 2020, I was a few years out of UVA. I was feeling pretty rusty. I actually hired a one-on-one interview coach to practice before my interview, just because it was my dream job and I wanted to nail it. And I actually like paid someone to do a 90-minute session with me to make sure I was just completely prepared for my interview. So there's no such thing as being too prepared.
Yeah, and more on what you're saying about displaying curiosity. What interviewers really want to see, especially early on in the process on like the phone screen or like the first hiring manager interview, is they want to see that you're a critical thinker. They want to see that you can think outside the box and problem solve, because more often than not, probably like 95% of the time, your first job out of college, you're really not going to use the majority of what you learned in class. So these hiring managers want to see that you're somebody that can pick up this new stuff really quickly.
For sure. So it sounds kind of like, you know, as like the consulting industry, they have case interviews. For a lot of market research positions, they'll do like sample assignment type of things. How would you say students could best prepare for a sample assignment like that if they were given one? What kinds of technical skills might they need to be able to prepare for something like that, or just anything else that you could think of?
I could chime in. I would say that one, just as a baseline, I think for entry-level roles, like no one's really expecting that as a college student you already know how to do the job, but they are looking for things like critical thinking, how well you communicate and present your ideas. Just it's kind of kind of crazy how much of jobs in the business world are just making PowerPoint decks, and being able to communicate your ideas in a succinct and clear way in that format. As well as, I think, as economics majors, a lot of these jobs really do benefit from your baseline comfort with basic statistics in Excel. That could very much come up in an assignment like this. And something else I was able to do, I think, to make mine kind of stand out for my entry-level role is, even though this wasn't something that they would typically be doing on a daily basis in their roles, I had an idea for a way that I could bring in this concept I had learned in a social psychology class into the recommendations I was giving, and kind of just showing my creativity and ability to connect dots between different things I was learning was something they found really interesting and compelling, and just kind of made the case that I could bring an extra perspective or an extra angle to think about something that they hadn't thought of.
Yeah, those are all good ones. I'll give an example of one project that I worked on in an interview process for it was a market research role. Basically what they said was usually they'll give you like a large data set, an Excel file or CSV file. And in this case, they gave inventory numbers for like quarter-over-quarters. Like here's the Q3 numbers and here's the Q4 numbers. And then they'll ask like a super open-ended question. They'll say, what do you see in these numbers? And that's the hardest part when you're putting together an answer. Because usually you'll put your results and your recommendations into a PowerPoint, but what the interviewer wants to see is like your thought process, why you came to this conclusion, like what does it mean that you're saying that this product increased quarter-over-quarter, like why does that matter? And they just want to see the thinking and rationale behind what analysis you did, because like Campbell was saying, like they're not expecting you to have the right answers. They just want to know how you got to your answer and see that you're able to communicate that direction.
And something Chris just said, I think Chris's example is a very good example of the type of thing you might receive. You might receive kind of a set of their data that they would typically work with, and then they would ask you a question like, what does this mean? Or what should the client do based on this? And you have a lot of free reign to structure it how you want. And so being like intentional about your structure and putting it together in a way that has an element of storytelling or like logical flow is also a really big part of both the sample assignments and ultimately a part of what your job ends up being in these roles.
That was definitely very helpful for us as students. It's 12:45 now, and I want to make sure that we do have enough time to get to the Q&A if any students have questions. So students, just as a reminder, if you have a question, you can unmute yourself and ask directly, or you can send your question to the via the chat to Jen or I, and we will ask for you. So if anyone has a question, this is a really great chance to direct it to our panelists. So we'll give you guys a few minutes if anyone's like chatting or typing it up right now. So.
Hi, my name is Timoon, and I'd like to ask that how do you see yourself using this job to advance your career in the future and your the direction that you would like to take your career in? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go first. So at Comscore, they have a multitude of different data sources and a bunch of different clients. So I'm very excited about the company that I work for because it has such a wide reach in terms of industries and clients and data opportunities. So I guess recommendation that I would make from that is choose a big company or a company that has a very wide scope, because several years into your job, you could transition to other positions within the same company.
Yeah, and I would say my experience has been in my first job, I was able to hone in pretty well on I know that this is the kind of work I like doing on a day-to-day. I like doing research and strategy on a day-to-day. And so in my first role, I said, cool, there's a lot of opportunities to be, really senior at that, to be, there's like, even at this 30-person company, there's people very late in their careers that work here and are in leadership roles. And that might be something I'm interested in. Now I've kind of pivoted and I'm in a similar role, but I've found it really exciting that in this role, I'm also exposed to a lot of people who come from a more tech orientation. And so I'm getting more exposure to people in roles like product managers, product designers, UX researchers, that sort of thing. And so now I'm also considering that that maybe I will keep hopping between sort of kind of like social impact tech for a while. I also think that something extremely valuable, if it works out this way in your first job, was the fact that I was in an agency that was working with clients across all different sectors, because I could get so many useful kind of pulses on what the culture and what jobs are like, not just in what my job is, but by seeing what the clients are like. So it's like, oh, if I were to work for like a big CPG firm, that's what consumer packaged goods like Hershey's or Nestle, something like that. If I were to work in that type of role, that's what the career trajectory would look like. If I were to work in the pharmaceutical industry, that's what that would look like. If I were to work at a big tech company like Facebook, that's what that would look like. And you really get to see kind of the pros and cons of all of that. And so I think thinking about something that's kind of client facing in an agency type role for your first job can also have that really neat informational benefit as well.
Thank you so much.
We had a few questions come in through the chat. Kanish asks if there are any resources to develop Excel skills that you guys could speak on.
Yeah, so when I was at UVA, I somehow had very little experience using Excel. I actually had more experience from my statistics classes using like Python and R. So what I would say to that is Excel, like, don't be scared by it, because once you are given something like data, once you're given something in front of you on your computer, the trial and error is pretty easy. There's like so many tutorials online. So I guess a resource I would say is just try to find, like, look up on Google like Excel case study for beginners or something like that, and find a way that you can get a large data file with a bunch of data points, and then have some like guiding questions. So it'll say like, how many people named John? How many apples did all of the people named John? I don't know, just general like calculations like that. It's once you have it in front of you, it's a lot easier to learn than just like watching videos.
Yeah, I think there is. So I just took the basic statistics classes that were required from economics major, but then I know there are other opportunities of classes at UVA, maybe sometimes classes that are cross-listed with the Comscore that could be useful applications as well. Anything that kind of gives you the chance to use a tool in like an applied project setting is really nice. But then also something I've just continued to use for all of my career since graduating is online courses and resources through things like Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, General Assembly, things like that have tons of free or low cost courses where you can just look up like Excel data analysis skills, and could be a really good use of your time if you're thinking about applying to some of these roles.
And I think the Econ Career Department gives students access to LinkedIn Learning. That'll be interesting to explore for you guys.
Also from the chat, Adka asks, what's something you wish you knew or would have known while applying for this job or any other job that you've had so far in your career? Is there anything that surprised you about your industry or your role?
So one thing that I wish I had asked in the interview process was, and this can go like across the board for any interviews, like what percent of the time, your day to day on a week, whatever, what percent of your week are you working on this task? So for me at Comscore, what percent of like your week are you working on QAing data? And had they told me 90% of the time, which is some weeks that's the case, that would have like influenced my decision probably a little bit. But ask that question, be very specific about the question instead of saying, what's the day to day like in this role? Say, like, what percent of the time are you doing like this in this role?
Yeah, I think something, if I'm being really honest, that is can be hard to get a sense of before you're in a job, but just is kind of good to know about is that not not all entry level jobs are created equal when it comes to, or like not all industries are similar at all when it comes to like the hours you work and the culture of working late. And that doesn't necessarily correlate the way you think with like higher or lower salaries. So like there's some industries where my friends work till 9 p.m. every night, and there's some industries where my friends log off at 5 p.m. every day. And asking that can be, I wouldn't ask that like directly in a mentoring call with someone that you're just kind of with like an older person or an older professional. It's a little delicate to ask that directly, but I think as much as you can get a sense from maybe like older friends you have at UVA from clubs that have graduated, or just like talking to professionals, like getting a sense of like how their work-life balance really does show up in their lives, is not the same for every job. And I think that's important to kind of understand the difference between before you get into something. The other people on this call may have better ideas about how to navigate that, because I do think I would be careful. I wouldn't be like what I would lead with in like an informational interview, but I think it is something to get aware of. Oh yeah, and it looks like there's some great resources in the chat too.
Yeah, to go off of that, it's really hard to explicitly ask in an interview, am I going to be working 80 hours a week? They're not going to say yes, even if you will end up working 80 hours in a week. One thing that I might recommend is setting up an informational interview with somebody who works in a parallel role, just at a different company, and ask them, what's the culture, what's the hours, because they'll give you a straight up answer.
I think Jen said in the chat, she'd be curious about your reaction to the questions in the article that she had just sent. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but that might be something interesting to cover. Otherwise, are there any other students that had any questions that we can cover? So it is 12:55, and we want to make sure that these students, Campbell and Chris, have enough time for their allotted office hours. So we will wrap up the panel now. Thank you, students, for attending this panel, and thank you to Campbell and Chris for providing their valuable insight.